January 1888. A hard cold held Millstone Crossing, Dakota Territory. Mara Venn stood straight at Hollis Quade's freight counter and named what she needed: one low sled, two mules, and a driver for 2 days out and back. Her husband, Ephraim, had been killed 13 days earlier when a wagon tongue sprang loose and crushed his chest against the wheel. Quade did not let her finish. He glanced at the waxed bundle beneath her hand and laughed once, short, without malice. Cruelty would have required more thought than he cared to spend on her. A dead repairman's cliff scribble, he called it. He set an 8-pound weight on the platform scale. The chain trembled and went still. Then he bent again to his ledger, having decided, for her, what was real. At the end of the counter, his wife, Mercy, sat sorting bone buttons and broken hooks. She looked up. She met Mara's eyes. She said nothing. Mara folded the bundle once too hard. The plate inside pressed a red line across her palm. She walked out without a word. The help was refused. The map was judged before anyone opened it. 13 days earlier, the same iron edge had rested beneath Ephraim Venn's scarred thumb. They carried him into the cabin on a wagon door because a blanket sagged too much under the weight of his chest. 2 men set the door across the table and stood back from it. Bram Deller took off his hat and stayed by the wall. There was no physician within a day's ride, and the injury was past what a physician could have changed. Ephraim breathed in short pulls. Each one cost him. Tobin sat by the stove with the broken folding rule and a knife, shaving a new peg to pin the halves. Nobody had asked him to fix it. It was the only thing his hands could still hold steady, so he held it. Nell had gone into her father's heavy coat like a burro and would not come out. She slept there while the men talked low. Mara knelt where he could see her. He moved his right hand. On the door beside him lay 3 things, and he pushed them toward her one at a time. A square of flour sack cloth, inked with lines, wrapped in waxed calfskin against the wet. A palm-sized plate of wrought iron, one edge beveled thin, 3 shallow hollows worn into its face. A 6-inch boxwood rule snapped, 3 knife notches cut along what remained. "Reach the west face before the next north wind," he said. "Take both children. Open it together." She asked him what waited there. She asked twice. "What I should have finished with you," he said. His thumb settled into the deepest of the 3 hollows in the iron. The scar across the knuckle fit the worn place, as though the worn place had been made for it. Then his hand slid off the plate and lay still, and his breathing stopped being work, and stopped. She did not leave the next morning or the morning after. There was a grave to open in ground that fought the spade. There was a corral rail Mallow had broken leaning over it, and the rail had to be mended before the cow got loose in the cold. There was a hen gone sick that had to be killed so the sickness would not travel. There were Ephraim's open accounts, small sums owed both ways, and the question of whether the claim would even pass to her hands or revert for want of a man's name on it. And there was the map, which explained nothing, folded on the shelf where she could not stop looking at it, and could not decide whether it was the one thing he had prepared for her or only the last of the things he had kept to himself. His coat hung by the door. Nell would not let it be moved. On the 3rd evening, Mara cut corn cakes for supper and sliced 3 into 4 before her hands understood what they were doing, and she stood over the 4th portion until it went cold. Then the wind at the depot came back around her, and Quade's ledger snapped shut in her memory, and she was standing in the cold street again with a red line across her palm and nowhere left to be refused. The town lay in one low row against the weather. A freight shed, a store, a smithy, A church that doubled as a reading room and a schoolhouse both. A scatter of cabins along a road that in summer carried ore wagons and now carried nothing. On a fence outside the store, old Galen Rusk stood with his back bent and read the day out loud to anyone near enough. The cattle in the corral had turned, every one of them, and stood with their tails to the northwest. Magpies came in low over the rails, low enough to vanish behind them, and did not climb. Under the sage, the frost had held white where the open ground had softened in the sun. The smoke off the smithy did not rise. It lay down flat and slid along the roofline. And that morning, Rusk said, his bridle leather had gone stiff in his hands hours before the cold in the air could account for it. 3 days, Rusk said. Maybe less. It'll come out of the northwest, and it will not pass north. Reverend Ossian Vale had his almanac open against the store wall, holding the page down against the breeze. The summary was plain, he said, and printed months ahead by men who studied it. The worst of the winter's weather would track north of the divide. The sun was on his face while he said it. The air was mild. A man reading cattle and bird flight against a printed page had chosen the page, and most of the men in the street had chosen it with him. Mara said nothing about it, but she had crossed the same softened ground that morning, and she had seen the frost holding white under the sage, where the sun could not reach it, and she had felt her own harness stiffen a full hour early when she brought the mare in. Nature had not begun its judgment. It had only laid the evidence where everyone could see it. Some read it, most did not. Quaid had already refused her the sled. That left iron and a book, and the smallest kindness in the town. She went to Bram Deller's forge with a plain offer and no begging in it. 4 feet of strap iron, 2 hinge pins, and the loan of his bending fork. In payment, she would reset every barrel hoop he had waiting and clean out his charcoal pit down to the clay, work he hated and put off. She did not know yet what the metal plate would need. She wanted iron in case it needed iron. Bram heard her out. He did not laugh, and he did not glance away. He turned over the strap ends in his bin and showed her what was there. A mill shaft had cracked, and it would take most of what he had to sleeve it, and 3 plows had to be sound before the spring ground opened, or half the claims along the creek would put in nothing. The iron was spoken for. His no was the kind a reasonable man gives, counting real things against other real things, and finding hers the smaller. He had helped carry Ephraim from the wagon yard. He had helped lower the coffin. He said what he believed was the truer help. Take what Quaid will give you for the claim, he said. Put the children on the eastbound stage before the passes close. And if the stage stops running before the storm, you don't believe in? She said. Bram had no answer to that. He looked at the iron in the bin as if it might have one, and it did not. She went to Reverend Vale for the county survey folio, because one page of it might show the old quarry cuts near the cliff and tell her what the ground did there. He would set her a chair and a lamp and let her read it as long as she liked, indoors. He could not let a page of it pass the door. He held a bond on every volume in the room, answerable to the county for each one, and a book carried out into weather by a widow chasing a mark on her dead husband's cloth was a book he would pay for himself when it did not come back. His refusal was gentle, and it was paperwork all the way down. Snow had begun by then, dry grains of it ticking against the window, not falling so much as drifting sideways. She could not sit for hours over a folio while the light and the road went. Bring the children to the schoolhouse, Vale said. There's a stove and a roof. Don't chase a scribble into open country. How many does the room hold? She asked. 30. How many have already claimed a place in it? He stopped answering, which was its own answer. She was behind the freight shed, out of the wind, tightening a strap on the mare when she heard the quick steps in the snow behind her. Mercy quaid, without a shawl, her breath short from hurrying. She put a small tobacco tin into Mara's hand and closed Mara's fingers over it. Inside was char cloth, a twist of dry tow, and a sliver of cedar gone amber with old wax. Mercy did not apologize for the counter, or for her husband, or for her own silence beside the buttons. "It caught the first time for me," she said. Then she was gone back around the shed, something that had to work on the first strike. Mara put the tin inside her coat, against her body, where it would stay dry. At the table that night, she spread the map flat and put a candle at each corner so it would not curl. The lines showed the cabin and the crossing, and the old freight road running west out of it. Needle draw, where the road went to a thread between two limestone walls. A creek, narrow, with a crossing marked. A ruin she knew was the abandoned lime kiln, and past all of it, hollow cliff. The long west-facing wall, everyone said, ended in solid rock, good for nothing, holding nothing. On its western face, he had drawn a circle set off to one side, and out from the circle a pale branching mark, forked and thin, like the spine of a fish laid open. Tobin bent close over it. His father, he said, had a way of doubling any line where a road could not safely carry wheels. One stroke for the track, a second beside it for the warning. Half the marks on the map were doubled. Ephraim had told them in cloth and ink that the wagon would not survive most of this. Nell had her chin at the table edge, lower than the rest of them, and she saw what the height gave her to see. Along the bottom margin, 3 small smudges the shape of hands, one broad, one narrower, one barely larger than her own thumb. Nobody could say whether they were meant or signatures, or the accident of a dirty hand steadying the cloth while the ink dried. Nell put her thumb over the smallest, and it covered it. Then Mara counted. She counted everything out loud because a thing counted out loud could not lie to her later. 23 pounds of flour, 11 of cornmeal, 6 of beans, 3 of bacon, 2 of dried apples, a pound of salt, half a pound of coffee, a small crock of lard, 4 onions, 1 jar of sorghum, 6 eggs, 1 sick hen already dead and plucked. For fire, less than a third of a cord, and most of that green cottonwood that would smoke before it burned. 4 days of hay for Mallow if she was mean with it, 6 days of poor hay for the old mare, 2 hens, 1 lame rooster. Nothing split and stacked beyond the cabin wall. Then the cabin itself, which was the true count. The stovepipe worn through at the collar so a hard fire would push smoke into the room. The northwest roof corner that lifted near 2 inches in a gust and had to be watched. Chinking gone from the 2 lowest courses on the wind side, a north sill damp to the touch, a shutter hanging on 1 hinge. Tobin heard the count and set his jaw against it. "We should stay," he said. "I can keep the stove. I can hold the roof corner. I can guard the stock. That's a man's work, and I can do it." "What will you guard?" she asked, "after the hay is gone and the roof lifts away in the dark?" He could not answer that either. Nobody in that cabin could answer the question she was asking. There was one man left in the country who might read the object in her hand, and he lived apart from all of them. Merritt Crowell had taken the abandoned relay station 3 miles west and filled it with what other people threw away. Wagon tire bent into hooks. A shovel with a cracked socket he had bound back to life with wet rawhide and 2 hardwood wedges instead of buying new iron. The rawhide had shrunk drum tight as it dried and would outlast the blade. He was mending harness by the window when she came in with the children and the cold behind them, and he did not act surprised to see any of it. He knew the west face of Hollow Cliff. He said so before she asked. He took the iron plate and turned it over in his hands, once, twice, and ran a thumb along the beveled edge and into the three hollows. Many hands shaped this, he said. He looked at the three of them standing in his doorway. Mara, Tobin, Nell. 3 hands, he said, and explained no more than that. The plate was no key, he told her. It did not turn. That beveled edge was made to slide under a lip and lift, to raise a latch, not twist one. The broken rule had been a gauge for something, a set distance a man wanted to get right in the dark. The forked mark on the cliff was no symbol at all. It was a vein of pale calcite in the rock, real stone, and it would show white against the gray, branched the way she'd seen it drawn. He could not go with her. He said it plainly and showed her why. His lower leg splinted straight, an ankle a quarry cart had rolled clean over the week before. He could not take needle draw on that leg, and a man who slowed her on that ground would kill all of them. So he gave her 4 things to hold to, counted on his fingers, and 1 thing to fear. Leave the wagon, it would not come home from the first descent. Follow the lee side of every ridge, even when the lee side doubled the distance, because distance in the lee was cheaper than a straight line in the wind. Find the white mineral line shaped like a fish's spine, and do not go past it. Open the door together, all of you together. And the fear, he said. White ice over moving water may be a roof with nothing under it. Strike it before you trust it. He let his cattle dog smell her mitten and the waxed calfskin and the mare's rein. The dog was small and rough-coated and gray at the muzzle, and he called it Scuff, and Scuff took the scent and did not look at Merritt again. The cliff won't save anyone who stops watching it, Merritt said as she went. He didn't leave you a thing that keeps itself. She packed for 2 children and 1 storm and a country that would not carry wheels. 12 pounds of flour, 6 of cornmeal, 4 of beans, 3 of bacon, 2 of dried apples, a pound of salt, half a pound of coffee, the lard crock, 2 onions, the sorghum in a stoppered bottle, the tin kettle, a small skillet, 3 cups, 2 spoons, 5 tallow candles, a quart of lamp oil, 3 wool blankets, the buffalo robe with the torn edge, a low sheet of canvas, 35 feet of hemp rope, 12 of rawhide line, hatchet, short shovel, auger, draw knife, hammer, cold chisel, awl, harness needles and wax thread, spare socks, dry mittens, 2 shirts for the children, the charcloth tin against her body, the map, the plate, the broken rule, a small account book and a pencil stub, water in 2 stoppered cans, a straight ash pole for the ice, and a straight ash bar, 4 feet of it, that she packed without a reason she could name, only that Ephraim had left it, leaned in the corner, and it looked made for something. What she left for cause, and named each one so it would not haunt her. The Dutch oven, too heavy for a hand sled, the plowshare, dead iron on a winter road, the water barrel, water froze and could not be carried down a rope, the bed frame, the crockery, Ephraim's Sunday boots too small for Tobin's feet and too heavy to carry for the price of nothing, the family Bible she wrapped in oilcloth and set in the driest trunk, the old mare she turned into the shared south pasture because her footing was gone, and she would fall on the descent and take the sled with her. There was no buyer for stock or claim with a storm warning already loose in the town, and no way to file a transfer before the north wind, so the selling she left undone with a clear head. Mallow she led to the mouth of the old lime cut, where a stone lip and a south wall broke the wind, and she took the halter off rather than leave the cow tied to an empty manger to starve on a rope. The hens she shut in the woodshed with the door cracked and grain scattered wide across the floor. She left behind everything that carried weight without purpose. They started before the sun, Tobin on the sled trace, Nell in the middle, the plate in a cloth pouch under Nell's dress against her skin, scuff quartering ahead and behind. The first 2 miles were only cold. Then the road ended. The freight road ran west and simply stopped at a cut where the bank had fallen years back and never been dug out. A loaded wagon could not have crossed it. Below, the ground dropped away down a limestone slope to the creek, steep enough that a man's own weight would run away with him. Mara set the rope around a horn of limestone and tested her weight against it before she trusted the children to it. She lowered the sled alone first, letting it down the slope on the line, so if it broke free empty. Then she showed Tobin the belay off her own body. Rope around the hip, not the hands. Feet set across the slope, not pointed down it. Weight kept low, close to the ground, one of them moving while the others held still. Tobin tried to take it all in his arms and his shoulders, the way strength wants to. His boots skated. She caught him on the hip rope and did not scold him. She only knelt and turned his feet sideways to the fall line with her hands. "The body carries more than the hands," she said, and let him feel it hold. Nell came down between Mara and the rock, small hands on the stone, and never looked at the drop. Scuff would not take the open chute at all. He cast along the lip until he found a narrow ledge under the wind and went down that and reached the bottom before any of them. The creek was the second thing, and the creek looked easy, which was the warning. At the marked crossing, the ice ran smooth and white and flat, prettier than anything they'd walked all day. Mara struck it with the ash pole. The first blow rang, hard and clean. The second, a stride out, came back with a hollow drum under it, and she felt the sound in her wrists. Water still moved beneath a thin roof there. Merritt's fear laid out at her feet. She turned them upstream along the bend near a mile out of the way. The ice at the bend was ugly, clouded, ridged, gray with old refreezing. She struck it, and it gave nothing back. No ring, no drum, only the dead thud of ice sitting on the creek bed. Nell wanted to know why the worse ice was the safe ice. "Because we tested it," Mara said, and put her across first. One sled runner punched through the crust at the very edge as they came off. The rawhide trace snapped taut and held the load square instead of letting it sluice sideways into the open water. She hauled it clear and did not stop to be frightened. The wind was waiting for them in needle draw. The walls funneled it. It came up the throat of the draw, hard enough to lean into, and it took the warmth off them faster than the day had any right to. And somewhere in that cold, Tobin stopped complaining, which she should have marked sooner because Tobin complaining was Tobin himself. He said he was warm enough. His words came short and slow, the ends of them dropping off. When they stopped, he could not close the buckle on the sled cover. His fingers went at it and slid off and went at it again. At the little rest, he took the cup from her and did not curl his fingers around it. He trapped it between both flat palms, the way you hold a thing you can no longer feel. She had watched a man once try to talk himself warm and die doing it. She moved. Behind a shoulder of rock, out of the direct wind, she pulled the canvas low against the lee wall and pinned its edge with stones so the wind could not get under it. She got Tobin's damp outer layer off him. The wet was stealing more heat than the air and packed dry wool around his chest and belly, his middle first, not his hands. She put the three of them under the buffalo robe together and pulled Scuff in against his legs. Mercy's charcloth caught the first spark off the flint on the first strike, the way Mercy had promised, when every open tinder bundle in the sled had already gone damp with blown snow. She built the fire small behind a stone screen and kept Tobin back from it. She warmed sorghum water in the cup and gave it to him in small mouthfuls. She put his hands inside her own clothes, against her body, and did not rub them because she knew rubbing frozen flesh only tore it, and she kept them away from the flame because heat too fast did the same harm as the cold. She held there, feeding the fire and feeding him warm water until the shivering came back into him hard, which was the sign she wanted, and until his answers came quick again and sharp with his own temper. When he could talk right, he wanted to turn back. The cabin was behind them, and known, he said, and this was a wall on a piece of cloth. She opened the map and turned it toward him, and past his shoulder the wind had already scoured their own tracks off the snow. Behind them was no longer a road home. Behind them was open ground straight into the throat of the northwest, and forward was the lee and the mark. Going back was not the safe direction anymore. It had stopped being the safe direction somewhere on the ice. Scuff would not take the fork the map seemed to want. Where the path split, he swung his whole body uphill toward the lee and stood there refusing the lower line. The lower line ran flat and easy across a white field. She struck the near edge of that field with the pole, and it drummed hollow. Snow bridged over a limestone sink, a roof again with nothing under it. They took the dog's way, doubling up and around, and the dog's way held. Near dusk, with the light going gray and the storm's first true weight coming up behind them, Nell stopped and pointed at the cliff. Pale calcite, branched and forked across the gray stone, exactly the fish's spine off the map. Scuff had already gone still beneath it. Behind a screen of dead pine limbs, where no one walking the base would ever look twice, the rock stepped back into a narrow worked recess, and in the recess was a shallow square depression the size of a hand. The plate fit the depression. It sat flush, and it did not turn. There was nothing to turn. Mara worked the beveled edge under the stone lip above it, and felt it catch on something and lift, a fraction, no more. She pressed her weight against it. Nothing moved. She pressed harder, and the cold worked into her fingers, and still nothing moved. 3 hands, Tobin said. Merritt's words come back to him. Nell was already lower than both of them, reading the wall from her own height. She found it. A rawhide loop tucked into a notch level with her shoulder, invisible to anyone taller, set exactly where only a child's eye would land. Tobin brushed grit from a square socket cut into the stone. Mara worked a loose block free and found a rope end coiled behind it. The ash bar she had packed without a reason slid into the square socket as though it had been cut for it, because it had. 4 things at once, then. Her left hand holding the plate up under the lip. Her right taking tension on the hidden rope. Tobin bearing down on the ash lever. Nell drawing the low loop tight toward the wall. Tobin bore down too soon. He put his weight on the lever before Nell had her loop tight, and something inside the rock jumped and set hard, and the plate froze under Mara's hand, and none of it would move forward or back. The wind drove powder snow into the recess and down their collars. Nell's mittens began to slide on the loop. There's a warning, Tobin said, small. 3 cuts by the socket. I saw it before. I wanted to understand it before you told me. Release it, Mara said. Nobody argued. They let go of all of it, every hand off, every piece at once, and stood back while something inside the cliff settled with a knock and went slack, then in order. The plate raised and held, the rope drawn to tension, the low loop tight in Nell's small fists, and only then, last, the lever brought down, slow, Tobin leaning into it a hair at a time. Something heavy shifted deep in the rock. A grinding came up through the stone into their feet. The slab moved, less than a foot, no more, and cold air breathed out of the gap, but no wind followed it into their faces. because the passage behind the slab bent hard to the side and broke the wind before it could reach them. Scuff went in first and came back out to them, then Nell, crawling through the gap, then the packs and the blankets handed in one at a time, then Tobin, then Mara, last backing through, and as she cleared it, the tensioned rope ran a counterweight down inside the rock and drew the stone shut behind her. The roar of the draw cut off as though a hand had closed over it. Inside, there was no wind and no light and no sound but 4 sets of breathing and the dog shaking snow from its coat. She understood it then, standing in the dark with her hand still on the cold plate. The door had never been meant for the strongest person. It had been built so that no one in their family could be left behind. Lantern light found the chamber a piece at a time, and none of it was treasure. Mara lit the wick from the last of the fire's coals carried in on a candle stub, and the flame steadied and threw its yellow out along the walls. And what it showed was work. A room, long and low, driven back into the limestone. She paced it later and made it near 38 feet by 17, the ceiling 8 feet at the crown. Natural stone overhead worked smooth in places by hand. The floor had been dug down below the level of the entrance passage, so that the cold air sliding in from outside pooled behind them and the warmer air held in the room. The passage they had come through bent twice, hard, and every bend was a place the wind died. An inner wall of dry-laid stone ran across the chamber, dividing the dry room they stood in from a larger, damper cavern beyond it that the lantern only hinted at. Against one wall, a food alcove stood up on stone piers, raised clear of the floor. A fuel bay sat behind a waist-high stone curb, split pine stacked in it with air gaps left between the courses. And down the length of the room ran a long stone bench, and under the bench, when she put her hand to a gap in its face, she felt the hollow of a flue. The chisel marks were not all one hand. She saw that with the lantern close. Some strokes were broad and shallow and old, the stone gone soft-edged and weathered at their bottoms. Others were narrow and clean and deeper, cut into fresh rock. More than one man had worked this hollow, and more than one lifetime lay between the oldest cuts and the newest. On a stone shelf sat a wrapped ledger, and Ephraim's hand in it said as much. The hollow was shaped before my coming. I repaired what I could name, and claim no part in the first work. Below that, only what he had done. Stones reset, clay joints renewed, the air inlet cleared, the bench rebuilt, the door mechanism repaired, supplies carried load by load, failed experiments with dates. The stores were real, and they were counted. 3 1/2 cords of split, seasoned pine, stacked with air between the rows so it would not rot. A smaller stack of dense hardwood for the long, slow burns. 2 raised bins, and in them 38 pounds of flour and 26 of cornmeal, 21 pounds of beans, a barrel of salt beef sealed under its own brine, hardtack in waxed cloth, dried apples and choke cherries, roots buried in dry sand against a wall, salt, vinegar, coffee, tallow, candles, lamp oil, pitch and rawhide and linen, needles, spare mittens, wool blankets sealed away in rawhide, charcoal, a bundle of dried plants she did not all know, a small iron pot, a shovel, tin patches, and a row of clay jars, each holding a different mortar which she did not understand yet. Then what had not survived the waiting? Mice had gone through one flour sack and fouled it. One bundle of blankets had taken damp and gone sour at the fold. The lamp oil stood lower than the ledger said it should. A clay joint by the second turn of the flue had cracked through. One of the two entrance ropes was worn near halfway, and along one wall a line of fresh mortar simply stopped, 18 inches short of the corner, a chalk line running on past where the mortar quit, a small stack of flat stones waiting beside it for hands that never came back. The unfinished mark. He had not stopped there because the work was done. He had stopped because he ran out of days. A note on the shelf, in his hand, sat over the whole of it. This place will not keep itself. Read it before you trust it. He had left them shelter. He had not left them a place that could survive without judgment. She would not light the heater until she understood it. That was the first thing the ledger asked of her, and the first thing the room asked of her, and she had learned on the ice what came of trusting a smooth surface. The firebox was small, lined with fired clay, made for short, hot burns and not for a smoldering log. From it, the flue ran back under the long bench, taking 2 turns before it found the natural fissure in the rock that carried smoke up and out. At each turn, a clay plug closed a clean-out. A low opening in the outer wall fed the fire its air from outside, and on a peg beside the box hung a note begun and never finished. Northwest pressure may stall the second turn. Remove shale, and the sentence ended. The pencil had stopped there. She warmed the throat of the chimney first, the way the ledger told her, a small twist of burning tow held up into the fissure until she felt the draft take hold and pull upward. Then she built the fire in the box, small, careful. It caught and drew, and the smoke went where it was meant to go, and for a little while the room was only a room with a fire in it. Then a gust came down over the cliff and pressed on the fissure from above. Scuff was up and backing away from the bench before Mara saw anything at all. Then Nell, low to the floor, said there was gray moving along the ground, and there was a ribbon of smoke sliding out from under the bench at the second turn, spreading flat across the stone toward them. Mara did not fan it or curse it. She closed the firebox to starve it, and Tobin shoveled sand over the burning wood and buried it out, and Nell dragged the low inlet open wider to give the room clean air, and Mara moved them all deeper into the chamber below the height of the smoke. Then she pulled the clay plug on the first clean-out and put the lantern to it. Tobin stood at her shoulder and set it quiet. He had seen the 3 cut marks beside the plug before, the same warning as the door. He had said nothing then either. He had wanted to understand it first. She did not answer that yet. She read the flue instead. Shale had fallen into the second turn and half choked it. The cracked joint was letting cold outside air into the flue, where it had no business being, killing the draft. And the throat of the chimney sat too cold to pull hard when a gust pressed down on it from the top. 3 faults, and the note had named the first before the pencil stopped. She cleared the shale out through the clean-out, hooking it free with the auger and drawing it into a pan. She packed the cracked joint with the clay from one of the jars, worked together with wood ash and a pinch of animal hair from the mortar bundle until it held together like putty, and smoothed it into the crack and let it set. Where the second turn ran rough, she fitted a thin strip of tin across the ledge to give the smoke a smoother path around the corner. And this time she warmed the throat longer before she lit anything. The burning tow held high until the draft ran steady up the fissure. Then the fire. It caught and it drew, and she held a candle at the firebox mouth and watched the flame lean inward toward the fire, pulled by the draft going up and out. No smoke came back into the room. She fed it and watched, and no smoke came back. Slowly the long stone bench began to take the heat into itself and hold it. Tobin lay along the warm stone under a blanket, and for the first time since the draw, his sleep was quiet, without the hard shivering. That was the repair that had nearly killed them. An unfinished flue and a note that stopped mid-word. It had not been an accident waiting in the dark. It had been a system showing them, on the first night, exactly where it was not yet done. The lower chamber held the water. She went down to it with the lantern the next day and read what he had left carved into the stone beside it. A slow seep came out of the limestone into a stone-lined cistern, and an overflow channel carried off what the cistern could not hold, down through a bed of gravel that drained it away. Marks were cut into the cistern wall at intervals, a scale for the water's depth, and beside them a warning she would come to need. After a thaw, the water may run foul. Let it stand. She understood the warmth of the place then, standing over the water. It was not fire that made the hollow livable. It was the rock. So deep in the limestone, the stone itself stayed near the same cool temperature the year around, far warmer than the killing air outside. A little over 50 degrees where they stood, no matter what the sky did. The bent passage kept the wind out. The lowered floor held the warm air down. The west face gathered what afternoon sun there was, and the rock held that warmth long after the sun had gone. The fire did not have to fight 40 below. It only had to lift a cool room into a warm one and warm the bench, and the bench did the rest through the night. That was the whole trick of it, and there was no miracle anywhere in it. There was only rock and depth, and a small door, and air let in where a man chose to let it. The record honored the ones who shaped the hollow first and took no credit it had not earned. Only his own repairs, only his own failures, dated, and low on a cistern wall, in old mortar gone hard as the stone around it, Nell found the thumbprint. It was pressed deep and clear, and across it ran the ridge of an old scar, the same scar Nell had watched settle into the iron plate under her father's hand, while the men talked low around the wagon door. She put her own thumb into the print. It was far too small to fill it. "Did he know," she asked, "that I would put mine here?" Nobody answered her. The mark had already done its work, and there was nothing to add to it. Mara stopped waiting for Ephraim to explain himself in words. There were almost no words, so she read him the way he had learned to read the hollow, Aksin, through the materials, through what a thing was made of and where it had come from. She knew the wood of the raised bins. She had seen those same adze strokes that morning, under her own supplies, on the runners of the hand sled. The bins and the sled and the cistern covers and the guards on the door ropes were all the same weathered pine and ash, and she remembered where it came from, because Ephraim had told her once, years back, without telling her why it mattered. Quaid had refused him the loan of a freight wagon to haul stone and timber out to the cliff. So Ephraim had gone to Merritt Crowell's relay station and mended harness there 6 evenings of it, and been paid in what the station had to spare: 2 ash runners, weathered boards, rawhide traces, a sheet of oilcloth, a length of broken sled iron. Refused the wagon, he had earned the wood. The wood had become the sled that carried her children down the rope, and the bins that kept her flour off the floor. The iron told the same kind of story. The lift plate, the shoe the latch rode in, the bearing the door swung on, the straps on the cleanouts, the tin at the flue's turn. All of it bent iron, not cast, not bought. Bram Deller had once refused Ephraim new hinge stock because a mill repair had the first claim on it, the same reasonable no Bram had given her at the forge. So Ephraim had learned from a passing wheelwright how to take discarded wagon tire, heat it, and bend it slow around a stone form, never quenching a hard curve, filing the bearing surfaces true after it cooled. Beside the good plate, on a shelf, stood 3 that had failed, cracked at the curve, bent wrong, given up on. He had not gotten it right the first time. He had gotten it wrong 3 times and kept the wrong ones so he would remember why. And the knowledge itself had a door it had been refused at. On a shelf sat a book with no cover, its pages greasy and smoke dark, corrected in the margins in his hand. Keep the grain above the floor, roots in dry sand, a gravel drain below the water. Keep the damp room and the dry room apart. Give the fire its own air from outside. Test. Do not assume. She knew that book. Vale's predecessor at the reading room had refused to let Ephraim carry it out because Ephraim owed an assessment on the room he could not pay, the same bond, the same paperwork. No, that Vale had given her over the folio. So Ephraim had climbed onto the reading room roof and stopped its leak and been given the ruined coverless volume nobody else wanted for his pay. Refused the loan, he had earned the book, and out of its pages had come the raised bins and the gravel drain and the two separated rooms she was standing between. On a plank near the mortar jars, she found the whole argument laid out in clay, numbered samples, scratched into the hardened faces. Clay alone, clay and sand, clay and ash, clay, ash, and crushed shale, clay, ash, shale, and hair. Several had cracked across. One had crumbled to pieces. No note anywhere claimed that any of it had worked the first time. On the last blank page of the coverless book, in his hand, a closed door is only useful if it makes a man study the wall. She sat with that a long while and made herself say the true thing about it, because the easy thing was a lie. Nothing in the hollow existed because rejection had become a blessing. Every one of those refusals had cost him time he did not have, labor after a full day's work, the dignity of asking and being turned down, and years of carrying it alone. The closed doors had not been gifts. They had only forced him to go elsewhere, to learn from another pair of hands, to test the thing himself, to fail, to change it, and to leave clearer evidence for whoever came behind him. That was all a closed door had ever done. It had made a hard man harder, and a slow work slower. The blessing, if there was one, was only in what he refused to let it stop. The storm settled over the country and stayed, and the days inside the hollow became a chain of small failures caught and mended, while below in the town, the same weather found the joints that no one had tested. The meltwater from the pre-storm thaw fouled the cistern first. The water came up pale with silt, and Nell said it smelled of wet clay, and it did. Mara stopped drawing from it. She let it stand until the silt fell, then dipped the clear water off the top and ran it through a cloth, then through crushed charcoal, then through clean sand and boiled every cup the children drank. Washing water she cut to almost nothing. She cleared the overflow channel where the thaw had choked it. When the next cup came up cool and clean, Nell smelled it again and said the clay was gone. 14 miles east, Quade's freight shed took the snow load its builder had never reckoned. Its collar ties were set too far apart to carry weight like that, and a center rafter began to bow under the white weight piling on the roof. Quade shored it with green posts, stood on end, and the green posts pressed down into ground. The thaw had softened and settled, and the roof edge on the northwest began to lift and work in the gusts. The same lifting corner Mara had counted in her own cabin and walked away from. The grain went next in the hollow. Tobin found flour dust under a bin, and Scuff fixed on a crack behind it and would not leave it, and there it was. A pitch seal split where the wood had shrunk in the dry chamber, and a mouse road worn into the sack. She pulled the sack, sifted what was clean, heated it to be sure. She hung the rest of the sacks off hooks clear of the wall, folded tin over each opening, sealed the edges with warm pitch, swept every crumb, and let Scuff have the run of the room to hunt. A thin line of loose flour laid down under the repair sat undisturbed the next morning. Nothing had crossed it. The smith's chimney went in the town. Bram Deller's tall iron chimney cap, that he had never quite gotten around to securing, tore loose in the wind, and the smoke came back down into the smithy so he could not work the main forge. So Bram built himself a low hearth behind a stone wall, out of field stone set in clay mixed with ash and animal hair, the humble mortar of men who had no iron and no money, the very thing he had all his life dismissed as fit only for people with no better option. It kept his building usable. He warmed himself at it and said nothing. Then the condensation, which came from the family's own success. The bench threw good heat now, and they had hung wet clothes near the cold stone to dry, and water beaded on the wall behind them and crept into a blanket edge. The vent had been shut too tight against the cold. Mara opened it a finger's width, no more, moved the drying clothes over the warm bench and away from the raw rock, hung a cord above the worst of the wall to lead the drip down into a pot, and pulled every blanket back off the stone. She shortened the fire's burns so it made less steam. By morning, the wall stood cool but dry, and no water gathered behind the bedding. And the schoolhouse in the town filled past what it was meant to hold. More than 40 people crowded into a room built for 30, wet coats steaming along the cold walls, bedding taking up the damp, one stove-fed green wood day and night, the drafts running under the door across the floor. Children coughed in the corners. Vale's almanac lay open on a desk where the storm north of the divide had never come, and no one read it now. The last of the hollow's faults was the entrance itself. Nell heard it first, a thin whistle at the door that changed pitch with every gust. Mara found 3 things wrong at once. The worn entrance rope had frayed further. A wedge under the slab guide had worked loose. And along a joint in the wall that looked sound, cold air was coming through an unfinished seam of that same halted mortar line. She held a candle to the joint and watched the flame lean steady toward the room, drawn by the leak, and she held a strand of wool near it and watched the strand drift the same way, and so she found the exact inch of it. She wrapped the worn rope with softened rawhide against more wear. She drove a second wedge home under the slab guide. She packed the seam with clay and ash and fitted flat stones from the waiting stack over the repair, the unused material finding its use at last, the corner a little nearer finished than he had left it. The whistle stopped. The candle flame stood straight up, and the room stopped losing its warmth between the fires. Nature offered no praise for any of it. It only went on testing every joint and every knot and every wall, gust after gust, until nothing weak was left hidden. The family knew nothing of the shed booing, or the chimney torn loose, or the crowded coffee room 14 miles east. They knew only their own walls, and the weather leaning on them, and old Galen Rusk in the town they could not see, organizing the fire watches, sending men out in pairs, and never alone, clearing the snow off the stove vents, tying guide ropes doorway to doorway, moving the children and the old ones off the outside walls, and never once, to any of them, saying that he had told them so. On the 6th day, when the hollow no longer ate every waking hour, Mara found the letter. It lay in a shallow box under the plank of failed mortar samples, folded once. He had found the place 7 years back, mending an abandoned quarry track, and found the door mechanism broken and the inner wall and the heater half built by hands long gone. He had come back to it whenever the work led him, and the weather, and the money, whenever she believed he was off repairing wagons in another town, whenever he could carry a small load out on the doubled route without spending a coin the household needed, whenever the shame of the last failed repair had loosened its hold enough to let him try again. He had meant to show her when it was finished. Every unfinished part had put the day off. Every delay had made the telling harder than the one before it. He had believed that bringing her an unsolved danger would only load her down, and that carrying every worry alone was how a husband kept his family safe. He had understood too late that his silence had taken from her the one thing she needed most. The time to learn the route herself, to test the door with her own hands, to look into the food and question his choices while he was still alive to answer. He did not ask her to forgive him. He listed instead what he had not been sure of and left it for her to watch. The second turn of the flue under a northwest wind, the wear on the entrance rope, the water after a thaw, the mortar seam behind the bench, the low loop which shrank and stiffened when it went dry. The last line stood by itself at the foot of the page. I left you a map because I ran out of time. I left the work unfinished because I finally understood it was never mine alone. Mara folded the letter. Then she opened it again and read the last line once more. Then she laid it flat on the shelf beside the engineering ledger, the love of it and the wrong of it together on the same page, because they had happened in the same man, and she would not take a knife to him now to separate them. She borrowed the pencil stub from Tobin. In the first blank space in the ledger, under his own last entry, she wrote in her own hand, second turn cleared, joint sealed, clay and ash and shale and hair, warmed the throat before lighting under a north wind, tested twice. Below it, Tobin wrote the date. Beside both, Nell pressed one thumb, inked, into the margin. On the 8th day, the wind fell off, and Mara did not believe it. Nell said the vent sounded wrong, quiet, but not open, the way a held breath is quiet. Scuff lay down but kept his head up and turned toward the entrance. The stillness had a lid on it. She would not touch the slab. They waited out another night. In the morning, she checked it properly. She held her hand to the inlet and felt the draft steady, with no pressure pulse driving in behind it. She listened at the door and heard snow sliding off the cliff face in fits and starts now, not the steady roar of it falling. Only then did she draw the wedge, fit the plate, and ease the slab open a few inches at a time. Cold air came in, and it came without violence. The storm was spent. They carried out only what they needed to mend the cabin and get home. The rest of the stores stayed where they were. She marked the concealed entrance from the inside so she could find it again, drew the slab shut, and brushed the tracks from the last stretch of the approach until the snow lay blank over it. They went home by the tested route. Mallow stood alive in the lime cut, gaunt and rough-coated, but on her feet, in the lee of the south wall where the stone lip had held the worst of the snow off her. Tobin did not run at her, which a boy of 11 wants to do more than almost anything. He carried an armful of hay out to where she stood and set it down, and waited and let the cow come to it in her own time. Responsibility had stopped being a thing he needed to prove by charging at it. 4 days they worked the cabin. They patched the lifted roof corner with salvaged freight canvas, replaced the split stovepipe collar, packed the 2 courses of missing chinking, and dug dry fuel out from under the collapsed woodshed. Every repair went into the ledger, and every item they had taken from the hollow, so the count would stay honest. She would not tell the town where the hollow was, and she was clear with herself about why. One narrow entrance, one slow seep of water, air enough for a few. A frightened settlement would pour into it and exhaust it, and foul it, and drown the water source, and the place that had saved 4 would kill 40. But the lessons were another matter. The mortar and its proportions, the raised bins, where to set a vent and how wide, how to test a draft with a candle and a strand of wool, how far apart a roof's braces had to stand, how to keep bedding off a cold wall, the signs Galen read in cattle and frost and flat smoke. Those belonged to anyone willing to learn them. Its location belonged to the cliff. Its lessons belonged to anyone willing to learn. The town she came back to had not been flattened. It had been found out. Quade's freight roof had torn open along the northwest edge, and flour lay frozen into ruined lumps under the snow, and one green post had kicked out sideways where the softened ground let it go. Bram warmed himself at a low fieldstone hearth. Damp blankets hung from the schoolhouse rafters, and the faces under them were the faces of people who had spent 8 days staying alive instead of living. guide ropes still ran between the doorways. Galen Rusk slept sitting up beside the schoolhouse stove, worn down to nothing from tending it. She made no grand entrance. She traded 2 pounds of dry beans first thing for a stovepipe collar, 6 feet of soundboard, and a little seasoned wood, because she had come back to a town that needed things, not to a town that owed her. Quaid took off his hat when she passed. He did not ask where she had gone. He asked one thing. Where did you learn to read a wall before it failed? From people you had already decided not to ask, she said. She never named the cliff. She gave him the right spacing for his roof braces after he agreed to lend his one sound sled, free, for the schoolhouse repairs. A trade first, and the knowledge after given for nothing once the trade was struck. Bram Deller said his own piece without being asked for it. I measured the burden, he said. I never measured the woman carrying it. She did not tell him he was forgiven because that was not hers to hand out like a coin. She offered him a trade instead, her tested mortar ratio, against his labor rebuilding the schoolhouse chimney. And when he took it, she gave him the ratio and would not let him pay for it. Vale opened the reading room after that. No fee, no bond, no deposit, no name written down. The damaged books, the ones nobody would insure, could be carried out by whoever could use them. When the weather turned again, the men asked Galen Rusk what he read in it before anyone opened an almanac. Mercy Quaid found Mara alone and pressed a second tinder tin into her hand and asked her nothing at all. And Quaid rebuilt his torn freight roof on the spacing Mara had copied out of a dead man's notes, though he never knew whose notes they were. On the last evening, in the cabin, Mara laid 4 things side by side on the table. The cloth map, the iron plate, the letter, the ledger. The paper map had only ever led them to the cliff. The larger map had been written somewhere else. In the angle of the flue and the pitch of the gravel drain, in the finger's width of the open vent, in the empty space behind the stone door, in the row of cracked clay samples that were failures kept on purpose, in the scarred thumbprint pressed into old mortar, and in every blank place where another pair of hands was expected someday to take up the work and carry it on. The hollow had never only said stay, it had said finish what I could not. She closed the ledger with several of its pages still empty on purpose and set it with the other 3. The shelter was not Ephraim's anymore. It never had been only his. It belonged to every hand that had built it, repaired it, and chosen to leave it stronger than it had been found.